In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates worse than death. For a space marine of the Adeptus Astartes, entombment within a dreadnought is considered one of the highest honors a chapter can bestow. When a warrior falls in battle, their body broken beyond repair, they are given a second life in service to the Emperor. Encased in a walking tomb of adamantium and ceramite, wired directly into systems that transform them into living weapons, these ancient heroes stride across battlefields for centuries, sometimes millennia, their wisdom and combat prowess preserved for future generations. But what happens when this sacred technology falls into the wrong hands? What happens when an Ork warband, those brutal Xenos who see the entire galaxy as one massive playground for violence, manages to capture one of these revered war machines? And not just any dreadnought, but one belonging to the World Eaters, the bloodthirsty servants of Horn, whose pilots are driven by the agonizing compulsion of the butcher's nails. Today, we're going to explore one of the most horrifying scenarios in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, a nightmare that combines the savage ingenuity of the greenskins with the tortured existence of a cornate berserker trapped in a metal shell. This isn't a fate that the Imperium likes to acknowledge. It's not documented in official battle reports or discussed in the halls of chapter fortresses. But in the vast, uncaring expanse of the galaxy, where billions die unremembered and entire worlds can vanish without a trace, these horrors absolutely happen. They happen in the forgotten corners of space, on worlds so far from imperial authority that no one will ever know the truth. And for the warrior trapped inside, for the consciousness that cannot escape, cannot die, and cannot even scream loud enough to be heard, this fate represents something infinitely worse than any clean death in battle could ever be. The World Eaters, sons of the Red Angel. To understand the true horror of this scenario, we first need to understand what makes the World Eaters unique among the traitor legions. Once, long ago during the Great Crusade, they were known as the Warhounds, one of the Emperor's 20 Space Marine legions. They were fierce warriors even then, known for their direct assault tactics and uncompromising brutality. But they were also disciplined, organized, and capable of complex strategic thinking. All of that changed when they were reunited with their primarch, Angron. Angron's story is one of the most tragic in all of Warhammer lore. Unlike his brothers, who were raised by the Emperor, or at least given relatively stable upbringings, Angron was enslaved as a child on the world of Nuceria. He was forced to fight in gladiatorial arenas, his masters seeking to turn him into the perfect killing machine. To achieve this, they implanted him with archaeotech devices known as the butcher's nails, crude cybernetic implants that were hammered directly into his skull and surgically grafted to his cerebral cortex. The butcher's nails were designed to do one thing: amplify aggression and eliminate anything that might interfere with that aggression. They worked by directly stimulating the parts of the brain responsible for anger and rage, while simultaneously deadening the neural pathways associated with empathy, contentment, and any form of peaceful emotion. Every moment that Angron wasn't killing something, the nails caused him excruciating pain. The only relief he ever found was in the act of violence itself, when the implants would flood his system with something approximating pleasure. Even that wasn't true pleasure in any meaningful sense, just a brief absence of the constant agony that defined his existence. When the Emperor found Angron, he was cornered with the last remnants of his slave army, about to make a final stand against the combined forces of the Nucerian nobility. The Emperor, in his questionable wisdom, teleported Angron away from his brothers and sisters in arms, leaving them to die without him. This betrayal, combined with the constant torment of the nails, poisoned any relationship Angron might have had with the Emperor. And when he took command of his legion, he immediately set about replicating the devices that had ruined his life, forcing his own sons to endure the same torture he did. The butcher's nails that were implanted into the World Eaters were primitive copies of Angron's originals. The Mechanicum couldn't fully understand the ancient technology, but they managed to create devices that enhanced aggression and pain tolerance far beyond even the already superhuman levels of an Astartes. The procedure had a 100% fatality rate at first. Legionaries would die on the operating table, their brains simply unable to handle the trauma of having the devices hammered into their skulls. But Angron persisted, demanding that his apothecaries continue the procedure until they perfected it. Eventually, using reverse-engineered technology from other sources and countless deaths, they succeeded. Khan was the first World Eater to survive the implantation. From that point forward, the World Eaters were a legion living in constant agony. Every moment outside of combat was torture. They couldn't experience joy, couldn't feel contentment, couldn't form the kinds of bonds that held other legions together. All they had was rage and the temporary relief that came from killing. They became increasingly unstable, prone to fits of violence even against their own battle brothers when no enemies were available. Their tactical acumen declined as the nails ate away at the parts of their brains responsible for complex thought. They went from being one of the most effective assault legions to being little more than rabid dogs barely kept on a leash. And then came the Horus heresy. Angron and his legion sided with the War Master without hesitation. They threw themselves into the civil war with savage enthusiasm, finally given free rein to kill other space marines without restraint. At Ishtvan III, they butchered their own brothers, who remained loyal to the Emperor. Throughout the heresy, they descended further and further into madness, until by the end, they were barely recognizable as the disciplined warriors they had once been. After the heresy failed, and the surviving traitor legions fled into the Eye of Terror, the World Eaters fragmented completely. They were no longer a unified force, but rather scattered war bands, each following their own Chaos Lord or champion. They dedicated themselves fully to Khorne, the blood god, the chaos deity who represented everything they had become. Khorne cared nothing for tactics or strategy. He cared only for blood and skulls, for violence and slaughter. The World Eaters suited him perfectly. Over the 10,000 years since the heresy, the World Eaters have become something barely human. Many have undergone demonic transformation, becoming vessels for the entities of the warp. Others have been twisted by the constant exposure to chaos, their bodies mutating in ways that reflect their service to the blood god. But through it all, one thing has remained constant. The butcher's nails continue to torture them, continue to drive them forward into battle after battle, killing without end because that's the only relief they'll ever know. Now imagine one of these warriors, already living in constant agony, already driven by uncontrollable rage, entombed within a Dreadnought sarcophagus. The Dreadnoughts of the World Eaters are known as Berserker Dreadnoughts, and they represent some of the most dangerous close combat units in the entire galaxy. They're optimized for brutal assaults, modified to be faster and more aggressive than standard patterns. Where other Dreadnoughts might hang back and provide fire support, Berserker Dreadnoughts charge directly into the enemy with no thought for their own survival. The pilots of these machines are trapped in a special kind of hell. They're already in constant pain from the butcher's nails. Now they're locked inside a metal tomb, unable to feel the satisfaction of killing with their own hands. They can't feel the weight of a chain axe, can't feel enemy blood splashing across their armor, can't experience the tactile feedback that provided their only relief from the nails. All they can do is experience combat through sensors and view screens, one step removed from the violence that defines their existence. For the Chaos Space Marines, entombment in a Dreadnought is viewed as a punishment rather than an honor. It's a fate worse than death, a living nightmare that can last for millennia. And for a World Eater, with the nails screaming in their head and no way to truly satisfy their need for violence, it's almost unimaginable torture. These are not the wise ancients of loyalist chapters, revered for their experience and counsel. They are howling, raging monsters, kept in chains when not in battle, their fury directed at anything and everything around them. This is what the Orks captured. This is what they decided to improve. The greenskin menace, understanding Ork nature. To understand what happens next, we need to understand the Orks themselves. These are not the cunning enemies of humanity that plan elaborate schemes or wage careful campaigns. The Orks are, in many ways, the perfect expression of violence for violence's sake. They exist to fight. Fighting makes them happy. Fighting makes them grow bigger and stronger. Fighting is, quite literally, the entire point of their existence. The Orks are a fungal species, spreading spores wherever they go that will eventually grow into new Orks, Gretchen, Squigs, and all the other subspecies of the Orkoid ecosystem. This means they're incredibly difficult to eradicate. You can't just kill all the Orks on a planet and call it clean. You have to engage in systematic biopurging to eliminate every spore, or within months that world will be overrun with greenskins again. It's one of the reasons the Imperium often resorts to exterminators when dealing with serious Ork infestations. Sometimes it's easier to just burn the entire planet than to try cleaning it properly. But what makes the Orks truly dangerous isn't just their numbers or their regenerative capabilities. It's the fact that they have a collective psychic field that literally warps reality according to their beliefs. If enough Orks believe something strongly enough, it becomes true. This is how their technology works. An Ork weapon that would be completely non-functional in anyone else's hands will work perfectly fine for an Ork because he believes it should work. Paint something red and it goes faster. Not because of any aerodynamic principle, but because Orks believe red things are faster, and their collective psychic field makes it so. This extends to their engineering as well. Orks have a specialized caste called mech boys, who possess an innate, genetically encoded understanding of mechanical principles. They can look at a pile of scrap and instinctively know how to turn it into a functioning vehicle or weapon. But here's the thing. They don't actually understand why it works. They just know that it does. They're operating on instinct, on genetic memory implanted millions of years ago by the ancient race that created them. And that instinct is supplemented by their psychic field, which fills in the gaps and makes their ramshackle contraptions actually function. Mech boys are obsessed with building bigger and better weapons, with constant experimentation and modification. They have no safety protocols, no quality control, and no concern for reproducibility. Every Ork machine is unique, cobbled together from whatever materials were available and reflecting the personal vision of the mech who built it. Sometimes these visions result in incredible weapons that can rival anything the Imperium produces. Other times they result in catastrophic failures that kill everyone nearby. The mechs consider both outcomes equally interesting. Working alongside the mech boys are the pain boys, who fill the role of doctors and surgeons in Ork society. Like the mechs, they possess genetic knowledge of their craft, understanding anatomy and surgery at an instinctive level. But also like the mechs, they're completely insane. A pain boy's idea of medical care involves sawing off limbs that could probably be saved and replacing them with crude bionics, experimenting with organ transplants without any consideration for compatibility, and occasionally swapping body parts between different patients just to see what happens. Orks only go to a pain boy when they have absolutely no other choice, when their injuries are so severe that even their incredible regenerative abilities can't handle it. And even then, there's a good chance they'll wake up with the wrong parts replaced. Need your arm fixed? Too bad. The pain boy wasn't paying attention and replaced your leg instead. And that leg might have a rocket booster attached to it. Or it might be from a completely different Ork. Or it might explode randomly. You never know with pain boys. The combination of mech boys and pain boys is what allows Orks to create their death dreads, which are their equivalent of space marine dreadnoughts. The process involves taking an Ork who volunteers for the procedure, usually one who's obsessed with violence even by Ork standards, and permanently wiring him into a walker. It's a painful and disorienting experience that trades away much of what makes an Ork in exchange for pure killing power. The volunteer is sealed into a claustrophobic metal can, with only a small slit to see through, unable to feel the wind or smell the battlefield, or experience combat in any real way. Most Orks who become Death Dread pilots quickly regret their decision. They start to go running in, which is Ork slang for going crazy. They'll kill anything they can reach during this period, friend or foe, until they're either destroyed or finally get deployed in battle, where they can direct their fury at actual enemies. Between battles, they're hung in chains or kept secured, foaming and screaming in impotent rage. It's not a good existence, but at least it's an Ork choosing to do it to himself. Now imagine these same mech boys and pain boys getting their hands on an Imperial Dreadnought. Not just any Dreadnought, but a Chaos one. Not just any Chaos Dreadnought, but one piloted by a World Eater, driven mad by the Butcher's nails. The Orks don't understand what they have. They don't comprehend the horror they're about to inflict. They just see a really big, really impressive piece of technology that they can loot and make more Orky. And they're going to do it with the same enthusiasm and complete lack of caution that they bring to everything else. The capture. When the war wins. Let's paint the picture of how this nightmare begins. The scenario we're imagining takes place on a world in the middle of a war zone, one of those countless planets, ground between multiple factions, where alliances shift by the hour, and yesterday's enemy might be tomorrow's convenient target. The World Eater's warband has been drawn here by the promise of battle, their ships translating from the warp at the edge of the system, and immediately setting course for the densest concentrations of fighting. They call themselves the Blades of Khorne, though that name means little in the grand scheme of things. Just another warband of Khorne worshippers, perhaps 30 or 40 Chaos Space Marines strong, supported by cultists and demon engines. Their leader is a Chaos Lord who goes by Kharzon the Bloody, and he's led his warband to this world because the fighting here is intense and constant. For a servant of Khorne, that's all the justification needed. Among their number is a berserker dreadnought known as Ancient Zarathos. He's been entombed for approximately 3 centuries, having fallen in battle when a Tau Hammerhead's railgun shot tore through his torso and left him with injuries that even chaos-enhanced regeneration couldn't fix. His warband's warsmith encased his dying body in an ancient Contemptor pattern sarcophagus they'd salvaged, one of the old, sophisticated designs from the Great Crusade. The procedure was barely successful. Zarathos woke up screaming, his consciousness immediately assaulted by the Butcher's nails that hadn't been removed during the surgery. For 300 years, Zarathos has been trapped in that walking tomb. When he's not in battle, he's kept in chains in the warband ship, howling his rage at the bulkheads. Every moment is agony. The nails scream in his head, demanding violence, demanding blood, but there's nothing to kill. When battle comes, he's unleashed like a rabid animal, charging forward with no tactics or strategy, just pure, murderous intent. His massive power fists have crushed tanks, ripped through infantry, and torn apart fortifications. His assault cannon has painted battlefields red with enemy blood. But it's never enough. It's never ever enough. The Blades of Khorne drop onto the planet's surface via drop pods and landing craft, crashing down in the middle of a war zone where Imperial Guard forces are fighting against an Ork invasion. The World Eaters don't care about the larger strategic situation. They don't coordinate with anyone. They simply identify the thickest concentration of enemies and charge directly into them, their berserkers roaring prayers to Khorne as they activate their chain axes. For the first few hours, it goes well. The Chaos Marines carve through both Imperial and Ork forces with equal enthusiasm, leaving mountains of corpses in their wake. Ancient Zarathos is at the forefront, his assault cannon speaking its deadly thunder, his power fists crushing anyone foolish enough to get close. The Butcher's nails sing in his head, granting him momentary relief from their torture with each kill. This is what he lives for. This is the only peace he'll ever know. But the Orks on this world are numerous. Incredibly numerous. This isn't just a raiding party or a small warband. This is a full, hundreds of thousands of Orks drawn together under a powerful war boss. The psychic resonance of so many greenskins gathered in one place has created a feedback loop, making them stronger, tougher, and more numerous than they have any right to be. And they're absolutely loving the appearance of the World Eaters. Finally, something that fights back with real enthusiasm, The Orks swarm the World Eater's position from all sides, not with any particular strategy, just with overwhelming numbers and firepower. Boys crash into the Berserkers in massive mobs, trading their lives gladly if it means getting in a good scrap. Trucks and battle wagons roar across the battlefield, spewing more Orks into the melee. Deft dreads stomp forward, their own crude weapons blazing. Above, Ork aircraft strafe the battlefield with complete disregard for which side they're hitting. The World Eaters, for all their ferocity, are simply outnumbered. It's not a matter of skill or courage. The Orks just keep coming, an endless green tide that buries everything in its path. One by one, the Berserkers fall. They fight to the last, taking dozens of Orks with them, but eventually, even they are overwhelmed. The cultists last approximately 30 seconds once the Chaos Marines are gone. The demon engines rampage through the Ork lines, killing hundreds before they're dragged down by sheer weight of numbers. Ancient Zarathos fights on longer than most. His Contemptor chassis is tough, its armor thick enough to shrug off most of what the Orks throw at it. He wades through the greenskins like a reaper, each swing of his power fists pulping multiple Orks. His assault cannon never stops firing, shells tearing through mob after mob. For a brief, glorious moment, the nails are quiet. He's killing so efficiently, so constantly, that the agony recedes, and he experiences something almost like contentment. And then a deft dread gets lucky. The pilot, a particularly unhinged Ork who's been running in for weeks, charges straight at Zarathos without any self-preservation instinct whatsoever. Most of the dread's weapons are already damaged or destroyed, but it still has one massive power claw. As Zarathos tears apart a mob of boys with his power fist, the deft dread slams into him from the side, its claw clamping around one of Zarathos's legs. The impact throws the Contemptor off balance, sending it crashing to the ground. Zarathos tries to rise, his servos screaming in protest. But the Orks are on him instantly. Dozens of them swarm over his chassis, wielding welding torches, power tools, and crude cutting implements. They're not trying to kill him, at least not intentionally. They're trying to capture him, because the mech boy in charge of this particular mob, a big mech called Nazdreg Ironjaw, has seen what the Humitin can do, and he wants it for himself. Zarathos fights with everything he has. His assault cannon swivels, trying to target the Orks on his hull, but they're too close, and the weapon jams from debris damage. His remaining power fist smashes into the ground, crushing Orks, but more just take their place. The butcher's nails scream in his head, louder than ever, because he's not killing anymore. He's helpless, trapped, and the agony is overwhelming. The Orks manage to pry open access panels on his chassis. They pour some kind of fungal compound into his systems that causes everything to seize up, his weapons going dead, his mobility systems freezing. Inside his sarcophagus, Zarathos is still conscious, still aware, screaming into the communication systems that no longer work. The last thing he hears before the Orks disable his audio pickups is their laughter. They're not laughing at him specifically. They're just laughing because they're Orks, and this is the best fun they've had all day. Then everything goes dark, and ancient Zarathos is dragged away to meet the mech boys. The examination. Ork science in action. Nazdreg Ironjaw's workshop is a monument to organized chaos. It occupies what used to be an Imperial manufacturing facility, but you'd never know it from looking at it now. The Orks have covered every surface with crude modifications, welding scrap metal wherever it seemed like a good idea, hanging tools and weapons from the ceiling with no apparent organizational system. Oil and various unidentifiable fluids leak from 100 different machines, pooling on the floor and mixing into a toxic sludge that would kill any human who breathed too much of it. Orks wade through it without concern. Gretchen scurry everywhere, carrying tools and components, occasionally getting stepped on by their larger cousins. Mech boys and their spanner assistants work on various projects, none of which appear to have any safety features whatsoever. Over in one corner, a group of Orks are building what might be a battle wagon, though it's hard to tell because they keep changing the design mid-construction. In another area, a mech is testing a new weapon that appears to fire squigs instead of bullets. The squigs are not pleased about this arrangement. Into this madhouse, a mob of orcs drags the captured contemptor Dreadnought. They've secured it to a massive transport sledge, using chains thick enough to moor a battleship. The entire assembly is being pulled by a combination of muscle power, vehicles, and what appears to be a domesticated squiggoth. It takes them 3 hours and 5 dead Gretchen to get the Dreadnought into position in the center of the workshop. Nazdreg approaches the machine with the excitement of a child on Christmas morning. He's a big orc, even by big mech standards, standing nearly 12 feet tall and covered in crude bionics. Half his skull has been replaced with metal plates, and one of his eyes is now a mechanical sensor array that whirs and clicks as it focuses on different details. He's wearing what might charitably be called a coat, though it's really just a collection of leather strips and metal plates stitched together with wire. "What we got here, Den?" he says to no one in particular, walking around the Dreadnought and examining it from every angle. "This is proper quality, this is. Look at the armor on this thing, and the weapons. Bet this could put holes in just about anything." One of his assistants, a mech called Burzag, joins him in the inspection. Burzag is younger and smaller, with fewer bionics and more of his original skull remaining. He's holding what appears to be a wrench that's been welded to a saw blade for no discernible reason. "Boss, what we gonna do with it? Use it for scrap?" Nazdreg shoots him a look that suggests Burzag might not live to see tomorrow. "Scrap? Scrap? Are you daft? This is the best loot we've had in months. We's gonna fix it up, make it proper orky, and then we's gonna use it in the next fight." The other mechs gathering around the Dreadnought nod in approval. This is exactly the kind of project they live for, taking something that belongs to someone else, someone who probably put a lot of effort into making it work, and improving it according to orc sensibilities. The fact that the original owners are unlikely to appreciate these improvements is irrelevant. "Right then," Nazdreg says, rubbing his hands together. "Let's get this thing open and see what's inside. Oi, you lot! Get over here with the cutting torches." A mob of Gretchen rush over, carrying cutting torches that are almost as big as they are. The mechs direct them to start working on the Dreadnought's access panels, looking for a way into the main sarcophagus. They're not being particularly careful about it. The torches score the ancient ceramite, leaving burn marks and gouges. Occasionally, they cut through something important and cause a shower of sparks or a spray of amniotic fluid. The Gretchen don't care. They're too scared of the mechs to complain. Inside the sarcophagus, Zarathos is aware of all of this. His audio pickups are damaged, but not completely destroyed. He can hear the orcs working, hear their crude language, hear them discussing what they're going to do to him. He tries to scream, tries to activate his weapons, tries to do anything, but his systems remain locked up from whatever the orcs poured into them. All he can do is listen and wait, the butcher's nails shrieking in his head because he's not killing anything. After about 2 hours of cutting, the Gretchen finally managed to pry open one of the main access panels. A gush of amniotic fluid spills out, mixed with blood and other less identifiable substances. The orcs barely notice, though a few Gretchen get washed away in the initial flood and have to swim out of the resulting puddle. Nazdreg leans in close, his mechanical eye clicking as it adjusts focus. Well, 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 he says. "What have we got here? Is that a Yumi inside?" The other mechs crowd around to look. What they see is horrifying, though they don't recognize it as such. Zarathos's body is barely recognizable as human anymore. Centuries of existence sustained only by the Dreadnought systems have left him withered and pale, more a corpse than a living being. His skin is translucent, shot through with tubes and wires that connect him to the machine. His skull is visible through the thin flesh, and embedded in that skull are the butcher's nails, their cables spreading through his brain like roots through soil. But he's alive. His eyes are open, moving frantically, and if the orcs could read human expressions, they might recognize the absolute terror and rage in them. His mouth works soundlessly, trying to form words that his damaged vocal cords can no longer produce. His fingers, what's left of them, twitch in futile attempts to make fists. "What's all that stuff in his head?" asks Burzag, pointing at the butcher's nails with his wrench saw. Nasdrig shrugs. "Dunno. Looks like some kind of gubbins. Must have been important for something." He reaches in and prods one of the cables with his finger, causing Zarathos to spasm in agony. "Interesting. I wonder what it does." "Should we take him out?" asks another mech. "Nah," says Nasdreg. "Leave him in. Might be important, or might not. We'll find out, won't we?" He turns to address the assembled mechs and Gretchen. "Right. Here's what we's gonna do. First, we's gonna clean out all this Yumi nonsense, all the fancy stuff that we don't need. Then we's gonna add some proper orc weapons and gubbins, and then we's gonna paint it, 'cause it ain't proper orky if it ain't painted." One of the spanners raises his hand. "Boss, what about the Yumi inside? We gonna take him out?" Nasdreg considers this for a moment. "Nah, he's part of the machine, ain't he? All wired in and that. We take him out, might break the whole thing. Sides, it'll be funny, won't it? The Yumi will get to see his tin can get made all orky." The orcs laugh at this. They think it's hilarious. The idea that they're about to subject a living being to unimaginable torture doesn't occur to them, or if it does, they don't care. To an orc, this is just a fun project, no different from building a new battle wagon or putting bigger guns on a deaf dread. And so, the work begins. The transformation, making it proper orky. The first phase of the transformation involves what the orcs generously call cleaning out the rubbish. This means removing any Imperial or Chaos components that the mechs don't understand or don't think are useful, which, given that mechs operate on instinct rather than actual engineering knowledge, means removing a lot of components that are actually critical to the Dreadnought's operation. They start by tearing out the targeting cogitators. These are sophisticated machine spirits that help the pilot acquire targets and track multiple threats simultaneously. To the orcs, they look like a bunch of wires and blinky lights that don't do nothing. Nasdreg personally rips them out, severing the connections without any concern for the consequences. Inside his sarcophagus, Zarathos feels the disconnection like losing a sense. His vision, which was already limited, becomes even more restricted as the machine spirits stop providing data overlays and targeting information. Next, they remove the assault cannon from the Dreadnought's right arm. This is one of the few decisions that makes sense from a practical standpoint. The ammunition feeds are damaged from the battle, and the orcs don't have the right caliber rounds to refill them anyway. But instead of carefully disconnecting the weapon, they just cut through the mounting with a combination of hacksaws and brute force. The assault cannon clatters to the workshop floor, followed by a shower of loose shells and mechanical components. "What we gonna put here instead?" asks Burzag, examining the empty mounting point. Nasdrig scratches his head, dislodging a small squig that had been nesting in his hair. "We need something with lots of dakka. Something that'll make the boys proud. How about that gun we took off the looted Lehman Russ?" "Which looted Lehman Russ, boss? We got loads of them. The one what exploded last week. The gun's still good, mostly." They spend the next 3 hours mounting what they claim is a battle cannon to the Dreadnought's arm. In reality, it's a weapon cobbled together from at least 3 different guns, none of which were originally designed to be mounted on a Dreadnought. The mounting is secured with roughly welded brackets and held in place with what appears to be industrial-strength adhesive that one of the Gretchen mixed up in a bucket. It's probably not rated for the kind of recoil a battle cannon generates, but the orcs don't care about things like recoil calculations or structural integrity. The power fist on the left arm stays because the orcs recognize it as proper killie and respect its ability to crush things. However, they can't resist improving it. They add spikes to the knuckles because spikes make everything better. They weld jagged teeth around the impact surface, stolen from what might have been a harvester thresher. They even attach a crude flamethrower to the forearm, just for good measure, connected to a fuel tank that leaks petroleum-based fluid down the Dreadnought's arm. Throughout all of this, Zarathos is conscious. The Orks haven't bothered to sedate him, partly because they don't know how, and partly because they haven't thought about it. He experiences every modification, every crude alteration to the machine that has been his body for 3 centuries. When they tear out the targeting cogitators, he feels the machine spirits die, their death screams echoing through his neural connections. When they mount the new weapons, he feels the imbalance they create, the way they shift the Dreadnought's center of gravity in ways that make no sense. The butcher's nails never stop screaming in his head. The agony is constant, unrelenting, made worse by the fact that he can't do anything about it. He can't kill. He can't fight. He can't even move. All he can do is endure, trapped in the darkness of his sarcophagus while the Orks work on the outside, their cheerful voices and crude jokes filtering through his damaged audio pickups, like the laughter of demons. But the physical modifications are just the beginning. The Orks don't stop at replacing the weapons. They start adding things that serve no purpose except to make the Dreadnought more orky. Nazdreg decides it needs more armor, so they weld plates of scrap metal onto the chassis, covering up the elegant lines of the Contemptor pattern with ugly, asymmetrical protection. Never mind that some of these plates are welded over important access hatches or cooling vents. Never mind that they add weight without adding meaningful protection. They look tough, and that's what matters. They add spikes everywhere. On the shoulders, on the head, on the knees, jutting out at random angles like the quills of some metal hedgehog. Some of these spikes are purely decorative. Others serve as impromptu melee weapons, extending the Dreadnought's threat range in close combat. A few are apparently meant to be trophies, with skulls and bones hung from them on chains. Whose skulls they are, nobody knows or cares. Next comes the paint job. This is where the transformation truly becomes complete, where the ancient Contemptor stops being even remotely recognizable as Imperial technology and becomes unmistakably Ork. The mechs bring out buckets of paint, arguing loudly about what colors to use. Some want red, because red makes things go faster. Others want blue, because blue is lucky. A few advocate for yellow, because yellow makes bigger explosions. Eventually, Nazdreg settles the argument by declaring that they'll use all the colors, plus a few more for good measure. The Gretchen are handed brushes and told to start painting. They slap the paint on with no regard for technique or aesthetics. They paint over sensors and viewports. They paint the weapons and the joints and the armor plates. They paint crude Ork glyphs that claim this machine belongs to Nazdreg's warband. They paint checkered patterns and stripes and symbols of Gork and Mork. By the time they're done, the Dreadnought looks like it was attacked by a rainbow that had been crossed with a scrap heap. But the Orks aren't done yet. They add sound systems, massive speakers welded to the chassis that can blast Ork war cries at volumes capable of rupturing human eardrums. They install what they claim is a force field generator, though it's really just a device that makes crackling electrical noises and occasionally shocks anyone who touches the Dreadnought. They attach a ram to the front, because why not? They even weld on a crude faceplate, giving the Dreadnought what looks like a grinning Ork face, complete with metal tusks. The final touch comes when a pain boy named Grotsnik arrives to check on Dayumi inside. Grotsnik is old for an Ork, his body covered in scars and bionics from decades of dangerous surgery. He's missing most of his teeth, which he lost in a squig-eating contest, and his left arm has been replaced with a mechanical appendage that features more tools than fingers. Grotsnik peers into the sarcophagus, examining Zarathos with the same casual interest a human might show when looking at an unusual insect. "This one's a bit past his best before date, ain't he? All dried up and funny looking." "Can you do anything with him?" asks Nazdreg. Grotsnik shrugs. "He's already got all dem wires in his head. Looks like someone beat me to the good bits. But I could add some things, make him work better with the machine. Got some new gubbins I've been wanting to try." "Like what?" "Well," says Grotsnik, pulling out what appears to be a collection of crude electrodes attached to a battery pack. "I got this thing what gives shocks to make muscles work when they shouldn't. And I got this other thing what pumps drugs into the blood to keep 'em awake and angry. Might be useful for making the Yumi fight better." Nazdreg nods approvingly. Do it, but don't kill him. We need him alive to pilot this thing. So Grotznik goes to work, reaching into the sarcophagus with his tools and attaching his crude devices directly to Zarathos's body. The pain boy doesn't use anesthetic, doesn't clean his instruments, doesn't follow any kind of medical protocol. He just jabs the electrodes into Zarathos's remaining flesh, connects them to the Dreadnought's power supply, and hopes for the best. When he's done, he wipes his bloody hands on his apron and declares the surgery a success. For Zarathos, this is a new level of hell. The electrodes fire randomly, causing his atrophied muscles to spasm in agony. The drug injectors pump crude Ork combat stimulants into his bloodstream, chemicals that were never meant for human physiology. They interact badly with the butcher's nails, creating feedback loops of pain and rage that would drive a lesser being completely insane. Zarathos, already half mad from centuries of torture, experiences each moment as an eternity of suffering. And through it all, he can't scream. His vocal cords are damaged beyond repair, his connection to the Dreadnought's Vox systems severed during the Ork modifications. All he can do is exist, trapped in silent agony, while the Orks stand outside, congratulating themselves on a job well done. Right then, says Nazdreg, stepping back to admire their work. I think we's done here. Time to give this beauty a test run. The assembled Orks cheer. They've created a monster, though not in the way they think. They've taken an already tortured warrior and made his existence infinitely worse. They've stripped away the dignity of his fallen state and transformed him into a parody of what he once was. And now they're going to send him into battle, to kill in their name, to serve the very Xenos species that the Imperium has fought for 10,000 years. For Zarathos, death would be a mercy, but death is not coming. Not today, not tomorrow, and possibly not ever. Because he's no longer ancient Zarathos, honored warrior of the World Eaters. He's now just another piece of looted Ork technology, one more ramshackle creation in a galaxy full of them. Welcome to your new existence. The prisoner's perspective, a mind in torment. To understand the true horror of Zarathos's situation, we need to step inside his experience, to comprehend what it means to be trapped in this state. Imagine, if you will, that you are a warrior born for battle. Your entire existence has been defined by combat, by the weight of a weapon in your hands, by the satisfying resistance of enemy flesh beneath your blade. You've spent your entire life preparing for war, training until violence becomes second nature, until you can read a battlefield the way poets read verse. Then imagine that this is taken from you. You're entombed in a metal shell, your body reduced to a withered husk kept alive only by machines. You can no longer feel the ground beneath your feet, can no longer smell the smoke of battle or taste the recycled air. Everything comes to you through sensors and view screens, cold digital information that can never replace real sensation. It's like being buried alive, except you can still see and hear, still maintain awareness of the world you can no longer truly experience. Now add the butcher's nails. These devices were originally designed to turn slaves into gladiators, to amplify aggression until killing becomes the only relief from constant suffering. They work by stimulating the parts of the brain responsible for rage while shutting down everything else, every gentler emotion, every peaceful thought. The pain they cause is not metaphorical. It's real, physical agony that pervades every moment of conscious existence. The only time it stops is when you're killing someone, when the act of violence triggers a temporary reprieve. For a world eater entombed in a dreadnought, this creates an impossible situation. You need to kill to stop the pain, but you're trapped in a machine that removes you from direct contact with combat. You can't feel your enemies die. You can't experience the satisfaction of ending a life with your own hands. Instead, you pull triggers and watch through view screens as your weapons do the work, one step removed from the violence that's supposed to bring you peace. It's torture refined to its purest form, an existence that dangles relief just out of reach while the nails scream their demands in your head. This is what Zarathos has endured for 300 years. 3 centuries of waking, fighting, being put back in chains, and then waking again. Over time, his mind has degraded. The parts of his brain that the nails don't immediately affect have slowly withered from lack of stimulation. His memories of life before the Dreadnought have faded to impressions and fragments. He can remember combat, remember killing, but the faces of his battle brothers have blurred together. He couldn't tell you the names of the worlds he's fought on, couldn't recount the campaigns he's participated in. All that remains is the nails, the rage, and the desperate need for violence that can never be fully satisfied. And now, the Orks have made it worse. The modifications they've made aren't just cosmetic changes. Every component they've removed, every system they've replaced, every crude addition they've welded on, affects how Zarathos experiences existence. When they tore out the targeting cogitators, they robbed him of his ability to track multiple enemies simultaneously. His awareness of the battlefield, already limited, becomes even more constrained. He can see what's directly in front of him, but everything else is darkness. When they replaced his assault cannon with their improvised battle cannon, they changed the fundamental balance of his weapons systems. The assault cannon was a precision tool, capable of tracking moving targets and adjusting its fire in real time. The Ork weapon is a blunt instrument, powerful but crude, with none of the sophisticated fire control systems of the original. Every shot he fires now requires conscious adjustment, compensating for recoil and drift that the original systems would have handled automatically. The additional weight from all the armor plates and spikes throws off his center of balance. He has to relearn how to walk, how to compensate for the new distribution of mass. His servos strain under loads they weren't designed to handle. Every movement produces warning signals that he can no longer properly interpret because the Orks removed half his diagnostic systems. He's piloting a machine that feels wrong in ways he can't fully articulate, like wearing armor that doesn't quite fit. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is the isolation. The World Eaters, for all their madness and violence, are still Space Marines. They operate in war bands, fight alongside battle brothers, and share the fellowship of Khorne's servants. Even in his Dreadnought, Zarathos was part of a larger whole. When he woke for battle, there were familiar voices on the Vox channels, coordinates being called out, orders being given. He was alone in his tomb, but he was alone together with his warband. Now that's gone. The Orks have severed or damaged most of his communication systems. He can no longer hear Vox traffic, can't communicate with anyone. When they activate him for battle, he won't be fighting alongside battle brothers. He'll be surrounded by Orks, by the enemy, forced to serve Xenos who think his suffering is funny. The isolation is complete, total, a void that amplifies every other torment he endures. And the Butcher's nails don't care about any of this. They don't care that he's been captured, that his situation has become infinitely worse, that every modification the Orks made increases his suffering. The nails just keep screaming, keep demanding violence, keep promising relief that never fully comes. They've been screaming for 3 centuries. They'll keep screaming for centuries more unless something ends his existence. Zarathos has tried to die. In the moments between battles, when the nails are loudest and the pain most intense, he's attempted to shut down his own systems, to will his hearts to stop beating. But the Dreadnought won't let him. Its life support systems are designed to preserve him despite any injuries or desires to the contrary. They regulate his heartbeat, control his breathing, maintain his body whether he wants them to or not. He's a prisoner in every sense of the word, trapped in a machine that won't let him escape through death. The Ork modifications have made even this impossible refuge more distant. Grotznik's crude electrodes shock his system randomly, preventing him from reaching any kind of meditative state where he might influence his own biology. The combat stimulants pump into his bloodstream on a timer, keeping him conscious and aware when he'd rather slip into oblivion. The Orks have accidentally created the perfect prison, one that denies even the mercy of unconsciousness. And so, Zarathos exists. He doesn't live, doesn't experience joy or hope or any positive emotion. He simply exists, moment to moment, breath to breath, heartbeat to heartbeat. He's aware of the workshop around him, can hear the orcs talking and laughing. He knows they're planning to use him in battle, to point him at enemies and let him kill. Part of him, the part that's still a servant of Horn, anticipates this with something like eagerness. At least in battle, the nails will quiet for a few moments. At least he'll have the temporary relief of violence. But another part of him, the part that remembers being human, that retains some fragment of the warrior he once was, understands the horror of what's about to happen. He's going to be used as a weapon by the enemies of humanity. He's going to kill in service to Xenos. He's going to betray everything he once stood for, not because he chooses to, but because he has no choice. The orcs have turned him into a puppet, and he'll dance on their strings because the alternative is remaining in this workshop, suffering in darkness until his mind finally breaks completely. If he could scream, he would. If he could beg for death, he would. If he could do anything except exist in silent torment, he would do it in a heartbeat. But he can't. All he can do is wait for the orcs to finish their preparations, wait to be activated, wait to be sent into battle where at least the nails might grant him a few moments of peace. This is hell, not the metaphorical hell of religious tradition, but a real, physical hell constructed from crude orc technology and the systematic degradation of a once proud warrior. And the worst part? Nobody knows. Nobody's coming to rescue him. His warband is dead, destroyed in the same battle that saw him captured. The Imperium doesn't care about fallen Chaos Marines. Horn cares only for blood, not for the specific vessels that provide it. Zarathos is alone in his suffering, and he will remain alone until either his body finally gives out or the orcs destroy him in battle. However long that takes, every second will be an eternity of agony. Welcome to your new existence. Welcome to what happens when orcs capture a World Eater's Dreadnought alive. First battle. The looted Dread goes to war. 3 days after the capture, Nazdreg Ironjaw decides it's time to test his new toy. A nearby Imperial fortress has been giving the orcs trouble, its walls too thick for their usual mob tactics to overcome quickly. The big mech figures that deploying the newly improved Dreadnought might give them the edge they need. Besides, he's eager to see if all his modifications actually work, and there's no better way to test orc technology than to use it in combat and see what explodes. The morning of the battle, Nazdreg's mech boys activate the Dreadnought for the first time since completing the modifications. They restore power to the main systems, reactivate the life support, and boot up what's left of the machine's cogitators. Inside the sarcophagus, Zarathos experiences consciousness returning like a physical blow. The amniotic fluid around him churns as his heart starts beating faster, as his withered body responds to the combat stimulants that Grotznik's devices immediately begin pumping into his bloodstream. The butcher's nails, which had been mercifully quiet during his enforced shutdown, roar back to life. They don't care that he's been inactive for 3 days. They don't acknowledge the modifications that have been made. They just scream, demanding violence, demanding blood, demanding that he kill something right now. The pain is immediate and overwhelming, so intense that Zarathos' body spasms in its restraints, causing the Dreadnought to shudder on its moorings. Then the sensory feeds come online, and for the first time, Zarathos can see what the orcs have done to him. The view screen that serves as his primary visual input shows the workshop, but it's distorted, processed through systems that no longer work properly. Colors are wrong, depth perception is off, and there are gaps in his field of vision where damaged sensors have simply stopped working. When he tries to turn his head, which in a Dreadnought means rotating his entire torso, the movement is sluggish and unresponsive. His motor control systems, never designed to handle the additional weight and crude modifications the orcs added, struggle to compensate. Outside the sarcophagus, Nazdreg watches the Dreadnought move and grins with satisfaction. "See? I told you it'd work. Bit slow maybe, but it's moving in it." One of his assistants looks less certain. Boss, are you sure that's normal? It's making some funny noises and that smoke coming from the back don't look right. Course it's normal. All good Ork machines make funny noises and smoke. Means they're working proper like. Nazdreg approaches the Dreadnought and slaps its leg plate with one massive hand, producing a metallic clang. Right then, time to take this beauty to the fight. They load Zarathos onto a massive transport, a vehicle that might have started life as an Imperial chimera, but has been so extensively modified that its original purpose is unrecognizable. The Dreadnought doesn't fit properly, so the Orks just let his legs hang off the back. It's not ideal, but it works well enough to get him to the battlefield. The journey to the fortress takes 2 hours, during which Zarathos is forced to experience what it means to be Ork property. The transport's suspension barely exists, so every bump and pothole translates directly into jarring impacts on his damaged systems. Orks ride alongside him, laughing and joking, and occasionally hitting his armor with their weapons just to hear the sound it makes. Some of them paint additional graffiti on his chassis, crude words and symbols that claim him as Nazdreg's Stomper or the best looted thing ever. He can't respond. His Vox systems are still severed, his weapons locked in safe mode during transport. All he can do is endure, the nails screaming in his head, promising relief if he could just kill something. But there's nothing to kill, just Orks, laughing at him, treating him like a piece of equipment instead of a warrior. If he still had the capacity for emotions beyond rage, he might feel humiliation. But the nails have burned away everything except the need for violence, so all he experiences is the desire to murder every Xenos in sight. When they finally reach the battlefield, Nazdreg has the transport pull up behind a ridge that provides cover from the fortress's guns. The Orks unload the Dreadnought with the same care they'd give any other piece of equipment, which is to say, none at all. They basically push him off the back of the transport and let him crash into the ground. The impact damages several of his newly installed systems and cracks one of the armor plates the Orks welded on, but nobody notices or cares. Nazdreg activates the Dreadnought's Vox system, establishing a crude one-way connection that allows him to give orders. His voice comes through garbled and distorted, processed through systems that were never designed for Ork communication protocols. Right, listen up in there, Yumi. Here's what you're gonna do. When I give the word, you're gonna charge the fortress gates and smash them open. Use that big gun on your arm to blast any gits that get in your way. And don't even think about turning around, 'cause we got lots of boys ready to crump you if you try anything funny. Inside the sarcophagus, Zarathos hears this, and his mind reels. He's being ordered by an Ork. Ork. He's supposed to follow the commands of a Xenos to serve as their weapon against other humans. Every fiber of his being rebels against this idea, even as the nails scream for him to just accept it, to take any excuse for violence regardless of who's giving the orders. But he has no choice. The Orks have welded his weapons in positions that make it impossible to turn them on the greenskins behind him. The crude override systems they've installed in his cogitator give them limited control over his movements, and besides, where would he go? He's surrounded by thousands of Orks. Even if he could turn around and start killing them, they'd overwhelm him in minutes, and then he'd be right back where he started, except more damaged, and probably with even more improvements added to his chassis. So when Nazdreg gives the order to advance, Zarathos does. He wills his damaged servos to move, pushing his augmented weight forward, and the looted Dreadnought begins to walk toward the fortress. His gait is unsteady, compensating for balance issues that the Ork modifications created. Each step produces a grinding noise from joints that aren't properly lubricated. Smoke trails from his exhaust ports, black and toxic, a side effect of the crude fuel the Orks are using instead of proper promethium. Behind him, a mob of Orks follows, using his bulk as mobile cover. They cheer as they advance, firing their weapons wildly in the general direction of the fortress. Most of their shots go nowhere near the enemy, but that doesn't matter to Orks. They're having fun, and that's what counts. Nasdreg walks alongside the Dreadnought, watching it move with the pride of a craftsman, observing his creation in action. The fortress defenders spot the Dreadnought immediately. How could they not? It's massive, covered in clashing colors, and making enough noise to wake the dead. The Imperial Guard troops manning the walls react with confusion first, then horror. That's clearly a Space Marine Dreadnought, but the paint job and modifications suggest it's somehow been captured by the Orks, which means somewhere, somehow, a sacred war machine has fallen into Xenos hands and been defiled. Heavy weapons teams on the walls open fire. Lascannons and autocannons track the Dreadnought, their operators trying to bring it down before it reaches the gates. Las bolts splash against the Dreadnought's armor, scoring the crude paint job but not penetrating the thick ceramite underneath. Autocannon shells have more effect, punching through some of the Ork-welded plates and damaging systems underneath. But Zarathos keeps moving. He's been shot at before. He's survived far worse than anything these defenders can throw at him. The butcher's nails sing as combat begins. This is what they've been demanding. This is what they live for. The pain recedes slightly as Zarathos's mind focuses on the tactical situation. His targeting systems, damaged and crude though they are, identify threats on the walls. His damaged cogitator calculates firing solutions as best it can, compensating for the fact that most of his sophisticated sensors are gone. When he's close enough, Zarathos fires the Ork-mounted battle cannon. The weapon roars, its crude ammunition igniting in a massive blast of propellant gases. The recoil is tremendous, far more than the original assault cannon would have produced, and the makeshift mounting brackets scream in protest. But the shell flies true, more through luck than anything else, and impacts directly on one of the heavy weapons teams. The explosion obliterates the gun crew and tears a chunk out of the fortress wall, sending debris raining down on the defenders below. The Orks behind Zarathos cheer wildly. "See dat? Told you it'd work," Nasdreg yells to his boys. "That's proper Ork engineering, dat is." Zarathos fires again, and again, each shot from the battle cannon tearing into the fortress defenses. He's not aiming with any particular precision, just firing at whatever looks like it might be important. The nails don't care about accuracy, they just want him to keep killing, keep destroying, keep providing the violence that brings temporary relief from their torture. And so he does, his damaged mind focusing entirely on the act of destruction, because it's the only thing that makes the pain bearable. But something is wrong. The weapon is heating up faster than it should, the crude cooling systems the Orks installed, unable to handle the sustained fire rate. Warning indicators that Zarathos can barely see flash in his limited visual feed, telling him that the barrel is warping, that the ammunition feed is jamming, that components are failing. He doesn't care. He keeps firing, keeps pulling the trigger with his damaged motor controls. Because stopping means the pain returns, and the nails start screaming again. On the 6th shot, the battle cannon explodes. The warped barrel and damaged firing mechanism combine to create a catastrophic failure, detonating the shell while it's still in the chamber. The blast tears the entire weapon mount off the Dreadnought's arm, sending shrapnel in all directions. Several Orks following behind Zarathos are killed instantly, shredded by flying metal. Nasdreg himself takes a piece of debris to the shoulder, tearing through his armor and drawing blood. "Zog it!" the big mech yells, clutching his wound. "Da gun exploded! Quick, someone go fix it!" But there's no time to fix anything, because the Dreadnought has reached the gates. Zarathos, his primary weapon gone, switches tactics without conscious thought. The nails are demanding he keep killing, and he has other tools available. His power fist, modified with Ork spikes and crude additions, still functions. He raises it and brings it down on the fortress gates with all the force his damaged servos can muster. The impact is tremendous. The gates, designed to withstand battering rams and explosive charges, actually buckle under the blow from a Dreadnought-scale power weapon. Zarathos strikes again and again, each impact sending shockwaves through the fortress structure. Defenders on the walls above try to stop him, firing down at his exposed back and head. but the Ork-welded armor plates absorb most of the damage. The few shots that get through hit non-critical systems, damaging but not stopping him. With a final massive strike, the gates shatter. The power fist tears through the reinforced metal and the locking mechanisms beyond, ripping a hole large enough for Orks to pour through. And pour through they do, dozens of them streaming past the Dreadnought into the fortress interior, whooping and firing their weapons. The defense devolves into chaotic, close combat as Orks and guardsmen clash in the narrow confines of the gate complex. Zarathos doesn't follow them in immediately. He's too big for the passage they've created, and besides, there are still enemies on the walls, enemies he can reach, enemies he can kill. The nails are quieter now, satisfied by the violence so far, but they're never completely silent. They're just waiting, building up, ready to start screaming again if he stops for even a moment. He turns his attention to the walls, identifying firing positions and weapon emplacements. His flamethrower, the crude one the Orks attached to his power fist, still has fuel. He aims it upward and triggers the mechanism. A gout of burning promethium, mixed with who knows what other chemicals the Orks added, sprays across the wall top. Guardsmen scream as they're immolated, their uniforms and flesh igniting instantly. The smell of burning human meat fills the air, processed through Zarathos's olfactory sensors and sent directly to his damaged brain. The nails approve, they always approve of killing. The pain recedes a little more, and for a brief moment, Zarathos experiences something approaching satisfaction. This is what he was made for, what the Emperor created him to do. Kill the enemies of humanity, destroy anything that stands against the Imperium. It doesn't matter that he's fallen to chaos, that he serves Khorne instead of the Emperor. The fundamental purpose remains the same. Except it's not the same, is it? He's not fighting for the Emperor, or even for Khorne. He's fighting for Orks. Every enemy he kills in this battle strengthens the Greenskin war effort, helps them claim this fortress, allows them to continue their rampage across this sector. He's become a weapon of the Xenos, the very thing he spent his life fighting against. The realization cuts through the fog of the nails, a moment of clarity that's almost worse than the pain. But the moment passes. The nails don't care about philosophy or loyalty or betrayal. They care about one thing: violence. And there's still plenty of that to be had. Zarathos continues his assault, methodically destroying the wall defenses, killing anyone who dares to oppose him. Behind and around him, the Orks swarm through the broken gates, overwhelming the Imperial defenders through sheer numbers and enthusiasm. The battle lasts for 3 more hours, during which Zarathos becomes a focal point of the carnage. He can't maneuver well in the confined spaces of the fortress, his bulk making him vulnerable to attacks from multiple angles. His armor takes dozens of hits, las bolts and solid rounds, and even a few melter charges. The Ork modifications prove their worth, the crude armor plates absorbing damage that might have penetrated his original chassis. But they also prove their inadequacy, as welding failures and poor design choices create weak points that clever defenders exploit. By the time the fortress falls, Zarathos is heavily damaged. His remaining arm barely functions, the power fist's mechanisms grinding and sparking with each movement. His legs are scored with dozens of impact craters, and one of his ankles has developed a pronounced limp from damaged actuators. The spikes the Orks added have mostly broken off, and his paint job is burned and blistered beyond recognition. He looks like exactly what he is, a cobbled-together nightmare that should have stopped working hours ago, but somehow keeps going through force of will and Ork psychic reinforcement. Inside the sarcophagus, Zarathos is barely conscious. The combination of sustained combat, the butcher's nails, and the crude drugs Grotznik's devices pumped into him has pushed his mind to the breaking point. He experiences the end of the battle as a series of disconnected impressions. The sound of Orks cheering their victory, the feeling of his systems finally shutting down, the blessed darkness as they deactivate his consciousness for transport back to the workshop. His last thought before shutdown is a desperate prayer to Khorne, begging the blood god to either grant him death or grant him revenge against the Xenos who have done this to him. But Khorne doesn't answer. Khorne never answers prayers for mercy or release. Khorne only cares about blood, and Zarathos has provided plenty of that today. The Orks load him back onto the transport, laughing and joking about the best day's fighting ever. Nazdreg inspects the damage with the practiced eye of someone who's seen countless machines break down in combat. Not bad for a first go. We'll get him back to the workshop, fix him up, make him even better. Maybe add some bigger guns this time, and some armor that don't fall off so easy. And so Zarathos returns to the workshop to be improved once again. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, some fates truly are worse than death. And for a World Eater's Dreadnought captured by Orks, the torture never ends. The long decline, further modifications, and degradation. Over the next several months, Zarathos becomes a regular feature of Nazdreg's warband. The big mech uses him in battle after battle, each engagement followed by a trip back to the workshop for repairs and improvements. With each modification cycle, the Dreadnought becomes less like what it once was and more like a true Ork creation. And with each battle, Zarathos's mind degrades further, worn down by constant violence and the unending torture of the butcher's nails. The first post-battle modification session focuses on replacing the destroyed battle cannon. Nazdreg decides that a single gun wasn't enough anyway, so he has his mech boys install a triple-barreled weapon they call a Gatling cannon. It's a monstrosity welded together from 3 heavy stubbers, a rotary mechanism from a damaged Imperial autocannon turret, and enough wishful thinking to violate several laws of physics. The ammunition feed is a tangle of belts and tubes that look like they should jam every 5 seconds. Somehow, through the power of Ork belief and questionable engineering, it actually works. They also decide his power fist needs more killybits, so they replace it entirely with a massive power claw they salvaged from a destroyed Death Dread. The claw is too big for the Dreadnought's arm mounting, so they just weld it on at an angle and hope for the best. It gives Zarathos a lopsided appearance, one arm noticeably larger than the other, but the Orks think it looks proper odd, and that's what matters. In battle, these modifications prove to be mixed blessings. The Gatling cannon spews shells at an impressive rate, chewing through infantry and light vehicles with ease. But its recoil is so intense that Zarathos can barely control his aim, and the ammunition consumption means he runs out of shells within minutes of sustained fire. The power claw is devastatingly effective in close combat, capable of tearing apart armored vehicles and crushing anything unfortunate enough to get within reach. But it's so heavy that it throws off his balance even more than before, making every movement a calculated effort to avoid toppling over. For Zarathos, each modification is another layer of hell. The power claw, being salvaged from an Ork machine, has crude neural interface connectors that don't properly integrate with his damaged systems. Every time he uses it, he experiences feedback pain as the incompatible systems try to communicate. The Gatling cannon's vibration shakes his entire frame, triggering damage warnings from systems that can no longer properly compensate. He's becoming less a precision instrument and more a blunt weapon, effective but crude, powerful but barely controllable. The physical modifications are bad enough, but the psychological toll is worse. With each battle, with each time he's forced to kill in service to the Orks, a little more of Zarathos' identity erodes. The butcher's nails have always made it hard to think, to remember, to maintain any sense of self beyond the immediate need for violence. But at least when he was fighting for his warband, he could tell himself he was serving a purpose. He was a soldier of Khorne, earning skulls for the blood god's throne. There was meaning, however twisted, in his existence. Now there's nothing. He kills because the Orks point him at enemies. He destroys because the nails demand it. Any sense of purpose or agency has been stripped away, leaving only the mechanical act of combat and the brief respite from pain it brings. He's become exactly what the Orks think he is: a tool, a weapon, a piece of equipment to be used and discarded when it breaks. And he is breaking. Slowly, inexorably, both body and mind are falling apart. After 3 months of service, Grotznik, the pain boy, decides Zarathos needs maintenance. The Orks' idea of maintenance involves opening up the sarcophagus and poking around Zarathos's organic components with crude instruments. He injects more of his experimental drugs, trying to compensate for the fact that Zarathos's body is slowly shutting down from the combination of age, trauma, and constant chemical assault. Some of these drugs work, keeping heart and lungs functioning despite the abuse. Others have unexpected side effects, causing muscle spasms or temporary blindness, or periods where Zarathos's mind simply disconnects from reality. The Pain Boy also decides to upgrade the butcher's nails, adding crude Ork technology to the ancient archaeotech. He welds electrodes to the existing cables, creates new pathways through Zarathos's brain, and generally experiments with something he doesn't understand at all. The result is catastrophic. The new connections cause the nails to fire randomly, creating spikes of agony that no amount of violence can alleviate. Zarathos begins experiencing what can only be described as neural seizures, periods where his entire consciousness is overwhelmed by pain and his body convulses in its restraints. Grotznik considers this a success. See? Now he's even angrier. That'll make him fight better. In reality, it just makes Zarathos' existence more unbearable. The seizures happen multiple times a day, leaving him exhausted and disoriented. His ability to process sensory information degrades further as the damaged nails interfere with normal neural function. He begins experiencing hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices that don't exist. Sometimes he thinks he's back on New Syria, fighting in the gladiatorial pits. Other times he believes he's still leading his warband, calling out orders to battle brothers who died centuries ago. The Orks don't notice or don't care. As long as the Dreadnought keeps working in battle, they're satisfied. They repair whatever breaks, replace whatever fails, and keep adding more modifications. They install a crude ramming blade on his front, because every good stompy boy needs a choppy bit. They add exhaust stacks that belch colored smoke because it looks impressive. They even attach a sound system that plays crude Ork music during combat, the bass frequencies vibrating through Zarathos's entire frame. With each modification, the Dreadnought becomes less the sophisticated contemptor it once was, and more a grotesque monument to Ork engineering. The original elegant lines are buried under layers of scrap metal and crude additions. The carefully balanced weapons systems are replaced with whatever the mech boys happen to have available. The sophisticated machine spirits that once inhabited the chassis are long dead, their sacred programming overwritten with crude Ork code that barely functions. By the 6-month mark, Zarathos is barely recognizable as either human or Dreadnought. He's become something unique, a horrifying fusion of Imperium technology, chaos corruption, and Ork engineering. And still he fights, because the nails demand it, because the Orks point him at enemies, because there's literally nothing else he can do. His existence has been reduced to a cycle. Wake, fight, endure modifications, sleep, and then wake again. There's no escape, no hope of rescue, no end in sight. Inside what's left of his mind, in the brief moments between the nails screaming and the combat drug's effects, Zarathos sometimes remembers what he used to be. A space marine, a warrior of the Emperor, corrupted, yes, but still a warrior. Someone who chose his own path, who made his own decisions, who died for causes he believed in. That person is gone now, lost in the degradation and torture. What remains is barely a consciousness at all, just a collection of impulses and pain responses trapped in a metal shell. And the worst part, he's starting to forget even that. The memories that survive the nail's assault become more fragmented with each passing week. He can't remember his original name, the one he had before he took the title Zarathos. He can't remember the faces of his gene brothers, or the world where he was recruited. Sometimes he can't even remember which legion he belonged to, whether he was a world eater or something else. The butcher's nails are eating his past, consuming everything that made him who he was, leaving only the rage and the need for violence. In another few months, there might not be anything left at all, just an empty husk, a body kept alive by machines, piloting a crude Ork war machine across battlefields it no longer understands. The Orks won't notice the difference. They'll keep using him until something finally breaks beyond their ability to repair. And then they'll strip him for parts, salvaging whatever looks useful and discarding the rest. This is the ultimate fate of a World Eater's Dreadnought captured by Orks. Not a quick death in battle, not even the slow degradation of a Chaos Dreadnought kept in chains between wars. Instead, a gradual dissolution of everything that makes one an individual, a person, a warrior. Until nothing remains but a weapon that once, long ago, used to be someone. Implications and aftermath. The capture and corruption of ancient Zarathos represents a singular horror in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, but it's not without precedent or consequences. Throughout the galaxy, in the forgotten corners where no one keeps, records and entire worlds can vanish without notice. Similar fates befall warriors who have the misfortune to be captured by enemies who view them as interesting toys rather than threats to be eliminated. For the Imperium, the loss of a dreadnought to Xenos capture is a tragedy that goes beyond the loss of a warrior or piece of equipment. Each dreadnought represents hundreds or thousands of years of service, irreplaceable experience and knowledge accumulated across countless battles. When one falls into enemy hands, particularly into the hands of species like the Orks, who might somehow make use of it, the loss is strategic as well as symbolic. The Mechanicum views it as a form of tech heresy, a sacred machine spirit corrupted and desecrated by Xenos hands. If the Imperium were to learn of Zarathos's fate, the response would be swift and absolute. A task force would be dispatched, likely including a full chapter of Space Marines, with orders to recover or destroy the corrupted dreadnought. They wouldn't do this to save Zarathos. There is no saving someone in his condition. They'd do it to prevent the Xenos from benefiting from Imperial technology, and to ensure that the Dreadnought's end comes with some dignity, fighting against rather than for the enemies of mankind. But the Imperium won't learn of Zarathos's fate, at least not in any official capacity. The world where he was captured is too far from the core, too unimportant in the grand scheme of the galaxy's endless wars. Whatever garrison monitored that system is likely dead or scattered, and even if survivors exist, their reports will be lost in the vast bureaucracy of the administratum. By the time anyone pieces together what happened, Zarathos will likely be nothing but scrap metal in some Ork's junk pile. For the Chaos Forces, particularly the World Eaters, losing a dreadnought to capture would normally trigger a response driven by rage rather than strategic thinking. The World Eaters don't plan careful recovery operations. They launch immediate, brutal attacks aimed at reclaiming what was lost and killing everyone involved. But in this case, Zarathos's entire warband died in the battle that saw him captured. There's no one left who knows what happened to him. No brothers in arms who might seek revenge or recovery. Khorne, the blood god the World Eaters serve, likely views the situation with indifference. The Chaos God cares nothing for the dignity or suffering of his servants. Blood flows regardless of who spills it or in whose name. If Zarathos continues to kill in his corrupted state, providing skulls for Khorne's throne, then from the Blood God's perspective, nothing has really changed. The servant's loyalty or awareness is irrelevant compared to the fundamental act of violence. The Orks, for their part, view the whole situation as a tremendous success. They've acquired a powerful war machine, made it properly Orky, and used it to great effect in multiple battles. The fact that there's a suffering consciousness trapped inside doesn't register as morally significant to them. Orks don't have the kind of empathy or consideration for others' suffering that would make them question their actions. They see a useful tool, and they use it. That's the extent of their ethical framework. Nazdreg Ironjaw has gained considerable status among his fellow mech boys for his successful looting of the Dreadnought. Other Orks look at what he's accomplished and wonder if they might pull off similar feats. This could lead to more deliberate attempts to capture enemy war machines intact rather than simply destroying them. If the practice spreads, it could result in more warriors finding themselves in situations similar to Zarathos, trapped and corrupted by enemies who view them as mechanical curiosities rather than living beings. From a technological perspective, the Orks' modifications to the Dreadnought are actually fascinating, if horrifying. They've managed to create something that shouldn't work but does, at least partially, through a combination of crude engineering and their psychic field's reality-warping effects. Amagos of the Mechanicum, if they could study the corrupted Dreadnought without going mad from the tech heresy it represents, might learn interesting things about how Ork technology interfaces with Imperial systems. But they'll never get that chance. Zarathos will continue to fight until something breaks beyond repair, or until the Orks simply get bored with him. And then he'll be discarded, left to rust in some scrap pile, his consciousness finally allowed to fade into oblivion. There will be no funeral rites, no remembrance, no honor given to a warrior who served for centuries before being subjected to this final degradation. This is perhaps the most profound horror of his situation. Not just the suffering itself, but the fact that it ultimately means nothing. In a galaxy of trillions, in a universe where entire civilizations can be wiped out without anyone noticing, one corrupted Dreadnought barely registers as a footnote. Zarathos' existence, from his recruitment as a space marine, through his fall to chaos and eventual capture by Orks, amounts to nothing more than a statistical anomaly in the grand ledger of the 41st Millennium's endless wars. And yet, for him, it means everything. Every moment of suffering is eternal. Every degradation, absolute. Every loss of identity, catastrophic. The universe may not care, but he experiences it all with whatever consciousness remains. That contrast between the cosmic insignificance and the personal totality of his suffering perhaps represents the ultimate expression of the grimdark nature of Warhammer 40,000. This is what happens when Orks capture a World-Eater's Dreadnought alive. Not a clean death, not even the mad existence of a typical Chaos Dreadnought. Instead, a slow dissolution into nothing, a gradual erasure of everything that once made someone a person, carried out by enemies who don't even understand what they're doing. It's a fate that no warrior deserves, regardless of what side they fight for or which gods they serve. But in the grim darkness of the far future, no one gets what they deserve. They get what the galaxy gives them, and sometimes what the galaxy gives is worse than any hell the human imagination could devise. The wider context, similar fates. Across the galaxy. While ancient Zarathos' story is uniquely horrifying, it exists within a broader pattern of similar fates scattered across the galaxy. The Orks are not the only xeno-species that captures and repurposes Imperial technology, and Dreadnoughts are not the only warriors who find themselves in situations worse than death. Understanding these parallel horrors helps contextualize just how vast and uncaring the 41st Millennium truly is. The Dark Eldar of Komarach, for instance, have been known to capture Space Marine dreadnoughts for their arena games. Unlike the Orks, who view their captives as interesting tools, the Dark Eldar understand exactly what they're doing when they torture someone. They're artists of suffering, capable of keeping a victim alive and conscious through injuries and modifications that would kill anyone else. A dreadnought captured by the Dark Eldar might find itself rewired to experience pain through every sensor, every system designed to protect the pilot, instead turned into a vector for agony. The homunculi, those twisted flesh sculptors, could keep such a prisoner alive for centuries, using advanced technology to prevent any escape through madness or death. The Tyranids present a different kind of horror. When the hive fleets consume worlds, they sometimes capture complex technology intact for study, attempting to understand and replicate its functions through biological means. A dreadnought absorbed by the Tyranids might find its consciousness somehow preserved within the hive mind, its knowledge and experience used to improve the swarm's tactics, while the pilot remains dimly aware of what's happening. There are unconfirmed reports from worlds at the edge of hive fleet territories of biomechanical constructs that seem to combine aspects of tyrannid organisms with imperial technology, shambling things that move with purpose, but also scream with voices that might once have been human. Even among the forces of chaos, fates exist that rival what Zarathos endures. Demon engines are created by binding demons to machines, but the process sometimes goes wrong, or sometimes goes right, in ways worse than wrong. A Dreadnought pilot whose sarcophagus becomes possessed by a demon might find themselves sharing space with an entity that feeds on their suffering, that prolongs their consciousness specifically to experience the horror of their situation more fully. The demon doesn't consume them entirely because the suffering is too delicious to end quickly. Instead, it stretches out the process over centuries, millennia, always keeping the pilot's awareness intact so they can appreciate what's being done to them. The forces of the Imperium itself are not blameless in creating these situations. The Mechanicum has been known to conduct experiments on failed Dreadnought pilots, studying what went wrong during the interment process by keeping the barely living subjects in states of perpetual semi-consciousness. The Inquisition maintains facilities where captured Chaos Dreadnoughts are interrogated, their pilots kept alive through technology while being subjected to methods designed to extract information. These are not merciful processes. They're systematic torture dressed up as necessary intelligence gathering, conducted by people who believe the ends justify any means. What all these scenarios have in common is the fundamental violation of a warrior's right to die with dignity. In a universe where trillions fight and perish daily, where death is so common it barely registers as noteworthy, the ability to actually die when you're supposed to becomes almost precious. The warriors who end up in these situations didn't choose extended life. They didn't ask to be preserved beyond their natural deaths. They were taken, modified, corrupted, and forced to continue existing because their captors found it useful or interesting or entertaining. The Imperium's response to knowledge of such fates is telling. Officially, the Adeptus Astartes would declare that any space marine, even one corrupted by chaos, deserves a warrior's death rather than this kind of extended torture. Unofficially, the calculus is more complex. Is it worth deploying significant resources to recover or destroy one fallen dreadnought? Does the symbolic value of showing that the Imperium protects its own outweigh the practical costs? More often than not, the answer is no. The machine of imperial bureaucracy grinds on, and individual suffering gets lost in the vast calculations of strategic necessity. Consider the mathematics of it. In the 41st millennium, approximately 1,000 Space Marine chapters exist, each typically possessing between 50 and 100 dreadnoughts of various patterns. That's somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 dreadnoughts across the Imperium at any given time. Of these, a certain percentage will fall in battle each year. Most of these will be destroyed outright, their pilots finally granted the death that was denied them during interment. But some, a small percentage, will be captured intact by enemies who see value in the technology or opportunity for cruelty. Let's say it's 1%. That's still 500 to 1,000 dreadnoughts per year falling into enemy hands in some recoverable state. Even if only 10% of those end up in situations like Zarathos faces, that's 50 to 100 warriors enduring this specific horror annually. Over the course of the 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy, accounting for variations in capture, rates and recovery operations, we're potentially looking at hundreds of thousands of dreadnought pilots who've experienced similar fates. The numbers become even more staggering when you consider that these are just the dreadnoughts. Space Marines captured and subjected to similar treatment, servitors created from what once were conscious beings, Imperial Guard soldiers taken for experimentation or entertainment. All of these add up to a tally of suffering that defies comprehension. The 41st millennium is built on a foundation of pain, and within that vast ocean of agony, Zarathos is just one drop. Significant to him, certainly. Eternal from his perspective, absolutely. But cosmically, barely a footnote. This scale of horror serves a purpose in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. It emphasizes the fundamental uncaring nature of the universe, the way individual tragedy gets swallowed by the sheer magnitude of galactic-scale warfare. It reinforces that there are no good guys, no faction that can claim moral high ground when everyone participates in or enables these atrocities. The Imperium claims to protect humanity, but will sacrifice millions without hesitation if the Emperor's will demands it. Chaos promises power, but delivers only slavery to entities that view mortal suffering as amusing. The xenospecies each have their own brutal methods and justifications. Nobody is innocent, and everybody suffers. Yet within this cosmic-scale horror, individual stories like Zarathos's maintain their power specifically because they're personal. We can't truly comprehend what it means for trillions to die. That number is too large, too abstract. But we can understand what it means for one consciousness to be trapped, tortured, and corrupted. We can imagine, however inadequately, what that existence might feel like. And in understanding one story, we begin to grasp the magnitude of the whole terrible edifice. The question becomes, does this knowledge change anything? If you're an Ork mech boy reading this, would it make you reconsider your modifications? Of course not. You'd probably just think, that's a lot of big words for something simple. If you're an Imperial commander, would it change your tactical calculations? Probably not significantly. The strategic situation would still dictate your actions, and individual suffering rarely factors into those equations. If you're a Chaos warlord, would it make you show mercy? The concept would be laughable. Chaos doesn't do mercy. The reality is that these situations persist, not because anyone specifically wants them to, but because the galaxy's systems create conditions where they become inevitable. War on this scale produces casualties, and some of those casualties end up in situations nobody planned or desired. The machinery of war grinds on regardless, consuming everything in its path, and occasionally producing outcomes so horrific they stand out even in a universe defined by horror. Zarathos and warriors like him exist in a liminal space between life and death, between human and machine, between purpose and meaninglessness. They're evidence that in the grim darkness of the far future, even the concept of death has been corrupted. You can't die when you're supposed to. You can't rest when you've served your time. You can't escape when existence becomes unbearable. You just continue, moment after moment, experiencing whatever fresh horrors each new day brings, until something finally breaks beyond any possibility of repair. And then, maybe, you get to rest. But probably not. Probably your consciousness gets preserved somehow, uploaded to a new system, bound to a demon, absorbed into a hive mind, or kept in some other state of awareness, specifically to prevent the mercy of oblivion. Because in the 41st millennium, even death isn't guaranteed to be permanent. Even the void offers no certain escape. This is what we mean when we say grimdark. Not just that bad things happen, but that the universe is structured to make bad things inevitable, to create systems that produce suffering as naturally as they produce anything else. It's a setting where hope is dangerous, where optimism is foolish, where the best you can realistically pray for is a clean death when your time comes. And sometimes, even that simple mercy is denied. The legacy of a forgotten warrior. As months turn to years, and years accumulate into what might be decades, the entity that was once ancient Zarathos continues its corrupted existence. By this point, the degradation is nearly complete. The sophisticated Contemptor chassis has been buried under so many Ork modifications that archaeotech experts wouldn't recognize it. The proud warrior who once led charges across battlefields now stumbles forward under Ork control, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, his weapons firing at targets he can barely perceive through damaged sensors. Inside the sarcophagus, what remains of consciousness is fragmentary at best. The butcher's nails, combined with Grotznik's continued improvements, have effectively lobotomized him. He still experiences pain, still feels the constant agony that defines existence with the nails, but he no longer understands why or how or even what he is. His identity has dissolved into a collection of base responses: pain, rage, the brief relief of killing, and then more pain. There's no narrative to his existence anymore, no story he could tell even if he had the capability to communicate. Just an endless cycle of sensation without meaning. The Orks, meanwhile, have continued using him with enthusiasm. Nazdreg's warband has grown significantly, boosted by their victories and the reputation they've gained from possessing such an impressive war machine. Other Orks flock to join a warband that has genuine looted Imperial tech, not just crude knockoffs or standard Ork equipment. The corrupted Dreadnought has become something of a mascot, a symbol of the warband's success and the big mech's skill. They've given it a proper Ork name now: Da Smashy Stomper of Doom. The name is stenciled across its chest plate in crude yellow letters, along with various Ork glyphs claiming it as Nazdreg's property. The original heraldry of the World Eaters, the crossed axes and chains, is long buried under layers of paint and modifications. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd never guess this had once been a Space Marine Dreadnought. It looks like exactly what it is now: an Ork war machine, crude and powerful and absurd. In battle, it performs adequately for Ork standards, which means it works sometimes and explodes other times. The Gatling cannon jams regularly, requiring Gretchen to clear the ammunition feeds while under fire. The power claw is devastating but so poorly balanced that the Dreadnought frequently topples over after using it, requiring other Orks to help it stand back up. The armor plates constantly fall off, held on by welds that were never adequate and have only degraded over time. But when it works, when all the systems align and the psychic field of the Wa reinforces the questionable engineering, it's genuinely impressive. There was a battle 3 months ago where Da Smashy Stomper of Doom accounted for 17 confirmed kills, including an Imperial knight that it grappled with and literally tore apart. The Orks still talk about that fight, how the Dreadnought grabbed the knight's leg and just kept pulling until something gave, sending the massive war machine crashing to the ground. Inside the sarcophagus, Zarathos experienced that fight as a blur of sensations without context. He felt the strain on his servos, the feedback from the power claw's grip, the impact when the knight fell. But he didn't understand what any of it meant. He couldn't process the tactical situation or recognize the significance of the kill. He just knew that the nails were quiet during the violence, and that was enough. But the degradation is accelerating now. Zarathos's organic body is failing in ways that even Grotznik's crude interventions can't prevent. His hearts beat irregularly, sometimes skipping beats or racing without cause. His lungs barely function, relying almost entirely on the Dreadnought's atmospheric systems to keep oxygen flowing to his brain. His muscles have atrophied to the point where they serve no function except to maintain the neural interfaces. He's kept alive by machines, by Ork modifications that were never designed for long-term life support, and it's only a matter of time before something critical fails. Grotznik examines him during routine maintenance and shakes his head. "He's not looking too good, boss. All dried up and wrinkly, more than usual. Might not last much longer." Nazdreg shrugs. "We got good use out of him. When he finally croaks, we'll just find another Yumi to stick in there. Or maybe we'll put one of the boys in instead, make it a proper Ork machine." This is how it ends, not with any grand gesture or final battle, but with bureaucratic indifference and practical planning for replacement. Zarathos, who was once a proud space marine, who fell to chaos and became a servant of Horn, who was captured and corrupted and used by Xenos, will simply wear out like any other piece of equipment. And when he does, he'll be discarded, his sarcophagus pried open and his body dumped somewhere for scavengers to claim. The Orks will salvage what they can from the Dreadnought chassis and move on to the next project, the next battle, the next victim. There will be no funeral rites, no remembrance, no record of his passing beyond perhaps a notation in some Ork's crude logbook that De Umi in de Stompy Thing stopped working today. His service to the Emperor, his fall to chaos, his centuries of suffering, all of it will amount to nothing more than a footnote in an Ork warband's maintenance records. This is the ultimate indignity, the final insult added to literal millennia of injury, to be forgotten completely, to have your existence matter so little that even your death goes unnoticed. But perhaps, in those final moments when his consciousness finally fades, Zarathos experiences something like peace. Perhaps the butcher's nails finally go silent, their screaming demands fading to nothing as the brain they're embedded in ceases to function. Perhaps there's a moment of clarity where all the fog and confusion lifts and he remembers who he was before all of this, who he could have been if things had gone differently. Perhaps the last thing he feels is relief, pure and simple, at finally being allowed to end. Or perhaps there's nothing. Perhaps consciousness simply stops, like a switch being flipped, with no final thoughts or emotions or realizations. Perhaps he dies the same way billions of others die daily in the 41st millennium, meaninglessly, unnoticed, unmourned. Just another casualty in a war that will never end, another name that will never be recorded, another story that will never be told. Either way, ancient Zarathos is gone. The Orks move on. The galaxy continues its endless cycle of violence, and somewhere, perhaps, another Dreadnought falls in battle and wakes to find itself in Ork hands, beginning the cycle anew. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, these stories never really end. They just repeat, with different names and faces, across countless worlds and countless wars. Conclusion. In the vast, uncaring expanse of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, countless horrors unfold daily. Worlds burn, civilizations fall, and warriors meet ends that defy description. But among all these nightmares, the fate of a captured World Eater's Dreadnought falling into Ork hands represents something uniquely terrible. It combines the already torturous existence of a World Eater trapped in a metal tomb with the savage, well-meaning cruelty of Ork improvement, creating a situation where death would truly be a mercy, but mercy never comes. Ancient Zarathos, or what remains of him, will continue his existence in this corrupted state until something finally breaks. Whether that's his body, his machine, or his mind doesn't really matter. The end result will be the same. Another casualty in the galaxy's endless wars. Another warrior lost to circumstances beyond his control. The Imperium won't mourn him. He fell to chaos long before the Orks captured him. The Chaos Forces won't avenge him. They don't even know what happened. The Orks won't remember him. When he breaks, they'll just move on to the next project. This is the reality of the 41st millennium. There are no happy endings, no last-minute rescues, no cavalry coming over the hill to save the day. There's just an endless grinding war machine that consumes everything in its path, leaving behind only ruins and echoes of what once was. And sometimes, just sometimes, that machine creates pockets of suffering so concentrated, so pure, that they stand out, even in a universe defined by horror. The lesson here, if there is one, is that in Warhammer 40,000, there truly are fates worse than death. For all the universe's obsession with killing and being killed, for all the glory supposedly found in dying for your cause, sometimes simply dying would be the kindest outcome. When you can't die, when you're trapped in a prison of flesh and metal and crude Ork modifications, when every moment is agony and there's no end in sight, that's when you understand what true horror means. So the next time you see an Ork player on the tabletop fielding what they call a looted Dreadnought, remember what that really represents. It's not just a fun conversion project or a neat gaming opportunity. It's a monument to suffering, a walking tomb that carries within it a consciousness that should have been allowed to die but wasn't. It's a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't killing them quickly. It's making sure they survive when they shouldn't, keeping them alive through technology and crude surgery, forcing them to continue existing long after they've lost everything that made life worth living. We've explored the nightmare from every angle today, from the origins of the World Eaters and their cursed butcher's nails, through the savage ingenuity of orc mech boys and pain boys, to the horrifying process of capture and modification, and finally, to the long degradation that represents this warrior's ultimate fate. It's a comprehensive look at what happens when the galaxy's cruelties stack together, when every system designed to preserve life instead creates conditions worse than death, when even the mercy of oblivion is denied. This is Warhammer 40,000 at its darkest. Not the grand battles between heroes and villains, not the last stands against overwhelming odds, not the glory of sacrifice in service to a higher cause. This is the other side of that coin, the side that shows what happens to the ones who don't die cleanly, who don't get remembered in songs or honored in halls of remembrance. This is what happens to the forgotten, the captured, the ones whose suffering serves no purpose except to remind us how vast and terrible this universe truly is. The galaxy grinds on, uncaring and eternal. Wars rage across a million worlds. Heroes rise and fall. Civilizations bloom and wither like flowers in a garden tended by mad gods. And somewhere, in some orc workshop on some forgotten world, another piece of Imperial technology is being improved. Another consciousness is being trapped in a nightmare from which there's no escape. Another story like Zarathos's is beginning. Because in the end, this isn't really about one dreadnought or one warrior. It's about a system, a universe, a reality that creates these situations as naturally as it creates anything else. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of Warhammer's darkest scenarios. If you found this exploration of the lore informative and engaging, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content exploring the grim darkness of the far future. We'll continue to bring you stories from across the galaxy, from the grandest battles to the most personal horrors, because understanding Warhammer 40,000 means understanding both the epic and the intimate, the celebrated and the forgotten. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But sometimes what survives the war is worse than what dies in it. May your deaths be clean, your service be honored, and may you never find yourself in the hands of those who view your suffering as entertainment or your existence as a tool to be used and discarded. The Emperor protects, they say, but out in the dark, far from his light, protection is in short supply and mercy even more so. Thank you for joining me on this journey into darkness. Stay safe out there in the grim darkness, and we'll see you in the next video.